Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cycle Breaker Summit. I'm Taylor Damiani, your summit host, and I am really excited to introduce our next speaker, Diane Metcalf. Diane is an author, an advocate, speaker, and a writer specializing in dysfunctional family dynamics and drawing from her personal healing journey to recover from narcissistic, physical, and emotional abuse and neglect. She developed healthy and effective recovery strategies that she happily shares with others seeking growth in their own recovery. Welcome, Diane. I'm so excited to have you here today.
I am super excited, Taylor. Thank you for inviting me. This is
Oh,
great. I'm so happy you're doing this.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy that you're a part of it. And I just loved your work so much. So I wanted to have you on here. And I wanted to just go ahead and dive right in. We know that it can be really difficult to consider our parent, our mother, to be an abuser or a narcissist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how difficult or uncomfortable it can be when we start searching for answers for our painful or dissatisfying mother relationship?
Yes. Yes. For me, well, I'll give you some personal examples from my life.
Okay.
Um, Narcissism wasn't something I'd ever considered, and I majored in psychology in school, and it's not something we ever talked about or learned about because it was
Yeah.
considered to be very rare, right?
Hmm.
So I've always had this uncomfortable, kind of unaccepting on my mother's part. Like I felt like she never accepted me. She was always trying to change me, control me. I was never good enough, and that's a thing, right? Not feeling good enough.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I got into my 20s, I decided, I think I need a little help, a little professional help just figuring this out because I was spinning my wheels and not really understanding, not getting anywhere with it. Um,
Mhm.
according to my mother, it was me. I needed to change. I needed to just become what she wanted me to become.
Yeah.
And for years, I really tried. I was like a square peg trying to fit myself into a round hole. And at some point, I realized it just wasn't working for me. It wasn't
Hmm.
going to happen. I was
Hmm.
never going to please her. And I just, low contact, no contact, that wasn't even a thing. So I didn't know what to do. So I got myself a therapist and we worked through a lot of different issues. And at some point, it was suggested that my mom might have had an undiagnosed um, mental illness, probably a personality disorder. It was just kind of put out there. Of course, they could not diagnose or anything like that because she
Right.
wasn't there.
Yeah.
And she would not go to therapy, of course, because narcissists really don't do that. They don't think there's anything wrong with themselves. So once he put that out there, it was very validating for me because I had kind of thought the same thing for a while, but wasn't sure.
Mm.
So, you're only meant to be in therapy for so long, and this was short term. So it was like 3 months. And then life happens and you move forward and, I put things on the back burner for a while, but it was always there. And
Yeah.
at some point later, again, I picked it up. I picked up the research and the search for, how can I fix this relationship? That was my goal, right? I need to fix it. Um,
Mm.
and at some point, I got on that path, as I think we all do. We all get here in different ways, but I found information about narcissism and I started reading it and I didn't want to believe it. And I didn't want to believe that my mom was an abuser because that's part of it is there's this thing called narcissism, awareness grief and narcissistic victim syndrome. And I was learning about those things and I didn't want to believe it. I was in shock. I was in denial. I was feeling depressed and angry and all the things. And actually, those are signs of being in narcissism awareness grief. So I was in
Mhm.
it without realizing I was in those phases of coming to grips with the idea that my mom was a narcissist.
Wow. Can you describe that term? And you might get to this in our conversation, but for those of us who have maybe never heard that specific term, is it the same thing as regular grief, the same stages, or what
It
does it mean?
It's similar. Narcissism awareness grief is a term actually coined by Dr. Christine Hammond, I believe her name is. So it's a lot like the Kubler-Ross, if you ever
Mhm.
have heard of that grief model,
Yeah.
for people who are dealing with death and other emotional losses. It's kind of like that, but there's an extra phase. So the first phase is denial. And I want to point out that these aren't linear. So you don't progress from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. You kind of bounce around
Mhm.
among them and you go back and forth, and
Yeah.
that's all part of the healing process, and a little bit of healing can take place in each phase. Then you go back
Mm.
to another phase that you've been in before and you heal a little more, and you keep doing that. And when you're doing it, you can't, if you're aware that you're in it and you're doing it, you can't put a time restriction on it. You've got to just let it happen in its own time, let it unfold. That's the biggest gift you can give yourself, is that gift of time to let yourself feel and heal. And
Mm.
so, as I said, denial, I think, is probably the phase that most of us start out with. And there was a lot of that, because as a daughter, I felt very guilty. Bad daughter, your
Yeah.
mom. You can't think of your mom as an abuser. She's your
Mm.
mother. Mothers aren't abusers. She's given up everything for you, and that whole
Yeah.
storyline.
Yeah.
Um, and I also felt guilty, just guilty, and like I was doing something wrong and I shouldn't be considering her as an abuser or as a narcissist. And that's really uncomfortable stuff to have to think that pertains to your mother.
It is. Yeah.
So denial, and then anger. I remember anger being kind of a big thing. Like, once you start to see that all the check boxes are there, and everything's aligning with what you're experiencing or have been experiencing as a child,
Mhm.
um, and you start to see, like, hey, there really wasn't anything wrong with me. There isn't anything wrong with me. It's not that I'm unlovable. It's not that I'm not good enough. It's not that I don't know how to please her or make her happy. Um, it's really her problem. It's her way of looking at the world and at me, and it's her way of perceiving and thinking. And once you start seeing that, you also start looking at yourself differently, because it's like, well, if it isn't me, if it's her, then that means I'm okay. I'm
Mm.
lovable. I'm good enough. I'm okay the way I am. And so that whole focus shifts.
Mm.
So, I mentioned the anger, and so the anger brought me to that point of, it's not me, it's her. I was angry that I had always thought it was me and always tried to change myself to please her.
Yeah.
And the anger made me realize also that I could stop doing that now, because it hadn't worked
Ah.
and it was never going to work.
Right.
So then you go into bargaining a little bit, like, what if I'd had a different mother? What if I had a different kind of childhood?
Mhm.
Because the things we learn about ourselves and start believing about ourselves as children, that doesn't go away when we become an adult. We
No.
kind of just morph into an adult, and all that stuff comes with us. And so, I started examining that, and how would things be different. And I learned how to let go of a lot of that too, because it can't be different. I can't go back and change anything, so it is what it is. And that whole "it is what it
Mhm.
is part of acceptance, which I'll talk about
Mm.
in a minute, but that's really where you end up. So after
Mm.
depression, I remember I started rewriting. Rewriting is the fifth phase, and it's the additional phase that the Kubler-Ross grief model doesn't have.
Okay.
And with rewriting, when you're in each of those phases, you kind of start doing that. You start to see things differently, and you start to, like, for me, I would revisit some of those really terrible childhood memories that I have. Like, my mom used some bizarre punishments. Um,
Mm.
I don't want to dwell on a lot of this stuff, but as an example, we struggled a lot over what I should eat. Like, there was this really big control issue around food and what I
Mm.
should eat and how much I should eat and when I should eat. And so, there was one time where, I didn't like beets. She had beets on the plate. She expected me to eat them. I think I was 6 years old, and I
Mhm.
was, no, I don't like beets. I don't want beets. Well, I was forced to eat the beets, and I vomited all over my dinner plate. Right. So, I mean, I was ashamed and humiliated about that, and I would never have shared that as an adult until I healed, because at that point, I realized I didn't do anything wrong. I had
Mhm.
nothing to be ashamed of. Uh, this is not good parental behavior.
Mm.
Shouldn't have happened. And for vomiting, I got sent into the attic, and I had to sit
Oh.
in the attic with my cold dinner, and she expected me to eat it up there, and she knew I was terrified of the attic. So, in revisiting those kinds of memories, I had the depression, I had the anger, I had the denial, but I also had that paradigm shift that it wasn't about me. I wasn't a bad child. I didn't do anything wrong. It was my mother's thinking, feeling, perspective. All of that was dysfunctional.
Mm.
Yeah. So I got to rewrite a lot of those, seeing those things now through the lens of her narcissism. And, it's not even just a perspective shift, it's a paradigm shift. You
Oh my
know,
gosh, yeah.
yeah, when you have that and you embrace it almost on a soul level, like
Mhm.
you realize, okay, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
You're also entering acceptance at that time. And so that's the paradigm shift. That's where the real healing can begin. That's where the power lives, is in acceptance.
Okay, we got to unpack this because I'm so curious
Yeah.
how you came to this paradigm shift, how you came to see it's not me, it's my mother. Because for so many of us, that distinction isn't so clear. We can
Right.
understand that our mother is a narcissist or our parent is a narcissist, but we still carry that blame and that shame
Right.
and
Right.
think that we are at fault or we're broken, something is wrong with us. So,
Mhm.
how did you make that transition?
I think talking about it with other narcissism survivors, I joined a support group,
Oh, wow.
and I would suggest doing that, but being careful, especially if it's an online group. You want to make sure it's moderated well and it's not just a bunch of people
Mhm.
moaning and groaning and complaining, because there's not going to be any growth, there.
Mhm.
But continuing to read, although, reading can only get you so far, because at some point you have to take action. You have to
Yeah.
actually do something. You have to change something.
Yeah.
So talking about it and really just feeling it. And I think a lot of people don't want to do that. People don't want to re-experience what they've experienced. I actually went into a lot of the most hurtful memories and I relived them in my mind. I mean, I really just re-experienced them. I cried. I experienced the humiliation, the shame, the sadness, the fear, all of that, but as an adult now. And I think that made the difference. I could see
Mm.
everything differently from an adult perspective and from the perspective that she's a narcissist. I was an innocent child. And I actually started pursuing inner child work
Mm.
where, just acknowledging that little child and in my mind just going back to her and saying, it wasn't you. You didn't do anything wrong. You're okay. Even
Mhm.
envisioning myself holding her and telling her things are good and that, if I could have been around back then to protect her, if I knew then what I know now, I could have come back to protect her and shield her and tell her, that she's
Mm.
going to be okay. So I
That's
think inner
beautiful.
child work really helps.
Yeah. It's beautiful. You were reparenting yourself, giving yourself
Yes,
what you needed, what you didn't get,
that's what it takes.
becoming that person.
Yeah, being empathetic with myself and compassionate, because those things didn't happen. If I fell down and hurt myself, I got
Mm.
scolded and sometimes punished while my little knees were bleeding. And when I grew up and had children, I paid attention to other moms because I really wanted to find other good moms that could be role models.
Um,
And I remember seeing this kid fall down and go running to her mom, and the mom held her and embraced her and kissed her and empathized and validated that she was hurting. And actually, she was a neighbor of mine, and she took the little girl in the house and dressed the wounds, whatever she did, and gave
mhm.
her a little baby aspirin or whatever to, deal with the pain. And I was taking mental notes because I thought, I wouldn't have known really what to do. on
Mm,
my own because that had never been modeled for me and I had never
yeah.
experienced it. So it's
Yeah.
sad that I had to do that, but sometimes that's what we have to do. We have to reparent and we have to get role models.
Oh, totally. The learning is social learning, how
Yes.
to respond with
Yes.
empathy. And if you didn't get that in the home by your parent,
Exactly.
looking for people out in the world, out in society, out your friends, your at school in your community, who you who you feel that feeling of warmth from, who you say, wow, I like how they do that. How else do we learn?
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly right. You have to seek it out because it doesn't if we haven't seen it, we haven't experienced it, we haven't had it role modeled, like where would that come from? It's
Yeah.
not in there.
It's not in there. Yeah. So
So,
talk to us more about acceptance and what that looks like, what that means for you.
okay, well, what I learned, like with acceptance, once I was really feeling like, okay, this is what it is. This is what it is. And now I have to deal with this. It meant I had to change some things for myself
Mm,
because I knew I couldn't change her. I couldn't change how she saw me, how she felt about me, how she treated me. I had to accept all of that. And at first, it's kind of a defeated feeling like,
mm,
all right, so, I'm accepting it, which doesn't mean you have to like it. I mean, acceptance isn't the same thing as liking it. So I accepted that she's who she is. I accepted that I couldn't change it. I learned the three C's, okay? There's something called three C's where you realize you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, and you can't control it.
mm.
And once I learned that, I was like, wow, like it was freeing. It was like the burden lifted. I don't have to fix my mother. I
Wow.
don't have any responsibility to fix my mother, and I don't have the ability to fix my mother. So it was like, great. Now what do I do? Because I have a
What do
whole
I
lot of
do with
free
all this
time.
spare time? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So, narcissists are very predictable. And that's empowering for us because if you know narcissistic behavior, and you've lived with your mom or your parent, whatever parent or narcissist is in your life and brought you to this program for cycle breakers, they're predictable and you can use that now. You can use
Mm,
that to turn your relationship around and make it on your terms. You can start setting boundaries around the behaviors that you don't want to tolerate anymore. We get to choose what behaviors of theirs that we will tolerate and which we won't. And
mhm,
I never knew that before. So that was very freeing. It was a big
mm.
insight of like, wow, I can actually control how much I'm willing to subject myself to. Who knew?
Yes.
So I learned how to stop giving her narcissistic supply, which when I first learned narcissistic supply, a lot of times it feels like it's the praise and the admiration and all of that narcissists love and need. But
Uh-huh.
it's also other things like when she would hurt my feelings and make me cry, that was narcissistic supply for her. Like my pain was her narcissistic supply. She would literally, get off on that.
Yeah.
And that's hard to admit, but it's twisted. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not normal at all.
Right.
Um, Also, as far as acceptance, I started to heal my CPTSD symptoms because I had a lot of those. I had to work on my self-esteem and my self-confidence,
Yeah.
had to address some shame.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
because, narcissists are blamers, they don't take responsibility, and they like to shame you. And
Yes.
that's all of their methods. There's more, but those are some methods of control,
Hmm.
where they just they want it's I keep saying twisted. I mean, it's just bizarre, isn't it? How much they want to make us feel bad about ourselves. I mean, there's nothing normal about that.
Yeah, we're not dealing with normal.
No, no, I mean, especially when you're talking about mother-child relationships,
Mhm.
mothers, we all think mothers are wonderful, loving, kind, compassionate, empathetic,
Yeah.
self-sacrificing, but you get to a point in life, especially if you have a narcissistic mother that you have to admit not all mothers are like that, and
Mhm.
even mothering is a learned behavior. So if she didn't learn good, parenting skills,
Yeah.
or if she was mistreated as a child too, then you've got that generational thing going on.
Right.
So a lot of healing for me, my goal became breaking that legacy of one-sided love. You know?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's powerful.
Doing better for my kids, you know?
What does that mean? What does that look like for you?
It means seeing them, hearing them, acknowledging them, validating what they're telling me, even if I don't understand it or I think, okay, I don't get it, but they are feeling this, they are seeing this. I validate them and I just make them feel, I hope, um, accepted and loved unconditionally.
Mm.
There's no there aren't things that they have to do in order for me to love them or tell them that I love them.
Mhm.
And I feel like this is more the way it's supposed to be. It's based on accepting each other as human beings, not
Mm.
having them meet all my expectations. In fact, I really have tried to remove or limit expectations in my life for everyone because one of the other things I learned is that, expectations can be premeditated resentments. So why would you want to have those?
Ah.
If you don't hold expectations and you just let people in life surprise you, it's pretty interesting what can happen and
Mm.
how freeing that can be.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you just said about releasing control.
Yes. Yeah, that is a lot of what it is. And I know that you have shared some things about also uh kind of growing up in a situation similar to mine and so
Yeah.
do you feel like
Yeah,
acceptance like
oh my gosh.
same thing? Yeah.
Acceptance has been such a game changer in my
Yeah.
own healing journey.
That's great to
Um,
hear.
you know, the I think in my journey with my own mother, just the constant striving, the ceaselessly striving and wanting to control the relationship and wanting and hoping for it to be
Yeah.
something that it
Yes.
wasn't, that it would
Yes.
never be.
Would
But
never be the wanting and the hoping. I really identify with that. Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just, it's like banging my head against
Yes.
the wall,
Yes.
hoping for something different,
Yes. Yes.
and that was really it contributed to so much grief and sadness and depression, and it wasn't until I fully accepted and I think that acceptance is a continuous journey, but
It is.
it wasn't until I fully came to acceptance that I felt free. That was when I got my power back. That is when I gained my
Yes.
freedom, my liberation,
Yes.
because I was no longer bound to trying to control something that wasn't in my control. I was able
Yes.
to let go of it and let it be what it was. And of course, it was devastating.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And,
But
acceptance too. Another word about acceptance, it's not about accepting unacceptable behavior. Because some people have said to me, well, if I have to accept everything, I'm like, no, no, you don't have to accept everything. You accept the fact that she has these issues that
right,
you can't fix and you can't control, but you do not have to like it and you do not have to accept unacceptable behavior. That is where boundaries come in.
right.
And, I grew up in a home where there was no boundaries. It's like, what's a boundary? Like, we all went
Yeah.
into each other's bedrooms. We all walked in the door without knocking. My mother would read my
Mhm.
mail or pick up a phone, the extension and listen in. That's when we had landlines. And I mean, there was no such thing as
Yeah,
boundaries. It wasn't a thing at all. And I had to learn, oh, what's a boundary? I first thought it's a wall. Is a boundary like a wall you put up, you keep people away?
mm,
And no, it really isn't. No,
yeah,
it's just a line in the sand. That we say, this far and no farther. I'm not going to tolerate this. Like with gaslighting, right? Like when
mm,
she would start the gaslighting, I didn't even know what gaslighting was, but I was suffering from the effects of it. I was
mm,
constantly confused and
mm.
because she would rewrite my memories, right? Or she would
Oh
rewrite
yeah, yeah.
reality. Like I saw her do something once and I immediately questioned her. I was in my 20s at that point, and so I was a little more gutsy about like calling her out on things.
Uh-huh.
Um, and she said, "What do you mean? I didn't do that. I didn't say that." And I'm like, "I just saw you." "No, I didn't. You must have dreamt it. You
Oh
imagined it." I was
my God.
always being told. I was dreaming things. I was imagining things. And so when I was a younger kid, like from 8 till maybe 21, actually the time I was living under her roof,
Yeah.
I was always doubting my perception and
Mm,
thinking, did I really just hear that? No, I don't think I did. And I got
yeah.
real good at self-gaslighting. I would tell myself, "Oh, I
Yes.
didn't see that. I didn't hear that. That didn't happen." And that's not good.
Yeah.
It's
It
not
makes
good.
sense that you would think that about
Yeah.
yourself because that was how you were conditioned.
Yeah. So when I got older and I learned about gaslighting, I decided I'm not accepting that anymore. And so when she would start to gaslight me, I would just say, I know what you're doing. Um, I know what I saw and what I heard. I trust my mind. I trust my senses. You can believe what you want to believe. I'm going to believe what I want to believe. And end of story. If she wanted to pursue that or argue about it, I would just change the subject or walk away. Or if we
Good
were
for
on the
you.
phone, I would just say, "Hey, gotta go." But I wasn't going to allow it to continue. And she learned after a while that
Mm.
I wasn't going to allow it. And so
Mhm.
part of this whole rewriting and acceptance and moving forward and healing is teaching her what you're going to accept and not accept. We have to reteach her how to treat us.
Mhm.
And it's going to be hard for her. And she's
Yeah.
not going to like it.
Mhm.
She's going to have
Yeah.
her little narcissistic rages and she's going to be insulting and do the verbal abuse and all of that.
Yeah.
And that's a good test for us because now we get to try out our new tools and our new strategies that we are learning and have learned and put them to use and continue teaching her while we are taking care of ourselves.
Mm.
So it can be a really, really great phase. Acceptance. I mean, it's just, but you have to do the work to get there.
Yeah. Hard work. Very hard work.
Yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. It's not fun. It's painful. And it can take a long time. So the thing is, you have to invest in yourself. That's it
Mm.
right there. You have to believe that you're worthy enough to invest that time in yourself, whether it's with a therapist or good self-help books or, a support group, whatever it takes, all of them,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, whatever it takes, invest in that time, invest the money if it requires some money, because you're worth it and your life will be better and you've got your whole life ahead of you. So why wouldn't you want to heal and continue healing and moving forward and quit focusing on your mother and, trying to please her? I remember having a conversation with my mother, I don't know, a few years ago when lotteries were not as big as they are now. It was like $1 million lottery. And I was like, oh, I think I might play the lottery. It would be great to win $1 million.
Mhm.
And she said something like, well, you won't really get $1 million. They're going to take taxes. You probably only end up with like $600,000. And I'm thinking, only my mother could make winning $1 million a negative thing, right? I mean, can you relate?
Yeah, that's
And like, I
such a
felt like
poignant
I was
example.
walking I mean, really, I felt constantly, like I was walking around with a question mark over my head, like WTF all the time, like trying
Yeah.
to figure out why did she say that? Why does she think this way? It was
Ah.
exhausting.
Oh my gosh, so exhausting. That is such a great example.
I thought
Oh,
you might relate to that.
yeah, I totally relate. I think it's painfully funny.
Uh, yeah.
Uh, so Diane, what is one thing out of everything that we covered today that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I would say, well, since we talked about narcissism awareness grief so much, and I've heard from, I wrote a lot of this in a book, by the way. I wrote a book called Lemon Moms, A Guide to Understand and Survive Maternal Narcissism. And it became a trilogy. So it became a thing. And I get letters from readers who tell me, I never heard of narcissism awareness grief or narcissistic victim syndrome. And thank you for writing this book because that was an eye opener. And so I have a free chapter that people can download and read about narcissism awareness grief to determine whether they're in it and
Excellent.
what that's about. Yeah,
And that's the freebie that you're offering to
that
us,
is the
right?
freebie. Yep, that
Okay,
is the freebie. So
wonderful.
I would like to leave people with the idea that maybe they should check that out and see if they're in narcissism awareness grief so
Mm.
that I think just understanding where you are in this scenario on your healing journey, it's good feedback. It's good to know where you are so that you can know when you're moving forward, how you're moving forward. And it's good to I think, journal as well and keep track of thoughts and feelings, because at some point you're going to notice a shift in the way you see things, especially your mother relationship and the
Mhm.
way you feel about it. And it's just really empowering when you start to see that shift happen, especially if you're writing things down and you can
Mhm.
acknowledge that growth. That's a lot of personal growth, and it's a thing to celebrate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Diane, one last question for you. What does being a cycle breaker mean to you?
It means breaking that legacy of one-sided love. When I heard the term one-sided love a few years ago, I thought, yeah, that is exactly what this is. I felt like I was standing on my head, twisting myself into pretzels. I mean, whatever it took to try to get her to see me, acknowledge me, love me, show me affection, and accept me for who I was. And I think cycle breakers for me means that you learn how to stop doing that. And it's not something you ever want to go back to doing. And if you
Mm,
have children, you are breaking the cycle, because this kind of thing is repetitive. If we don't break that, if we don't break out of this way of living and dealing with our mothers, our kids are watching us, and it's going to continue.
mhm,
This is what we're modeling for them. We're modeling not good stuff if we're constantly focusing on our mothers and feeling not good about ourselves.
mhm.
They're going to pick up on that, and they're going to do the same thing. It's sad, but research indicates that that's what happens. So,
Totally. It stops
yeah,
with us.
yes, yes. So I'm ecstatic that you are having this summit, because it is so necessary. And June is Narcissism Awareness Month, so it's perfect.
That's right.
Yeah.
Diane, thank you so much. Thank you for being here, for offering these insights, for sharing about narcissism awareness grief, and just talking about the journey through to acceptance.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for watching. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thanks, Taylor. I enjoyed it.